De aquella viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
Puedo morir como nací, sabedlo, puro, sencillo y optimista, de pie sobre la tierra como un árbol, en las filas del Partido Comunista, en las filas del Partido Comunista. Abrí sobre la tarde mi ventana y me sentí un diestro paisajista. Oh, qué bello es pintar para la vida, pintar para el Partido Comunista, pintar para el Partido Comunista. Aquel que amasa sangre entre las nubes, el criminal, el sádico, el guerrista, será aplastado en el mañana limpio por el limpio Partido Comunista, por el limpio Partido Comunista. Yo quiero que mi sangre fluya fácil, siempre ya la primera vista. Yo no puedo equivocarme, compañeros, mi amor es del Partido Comunista, mi amor es del Partido Comunista. Puedo morir como nací, saberlo, puro, sencillo y optimista, de pie sobre la tierra como un árbol, en las filas del Partido Comunista, en las filas del Partido Comunista.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Unmasking Imperialism, episode 46, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, Socialist Cuba, an eyewitness view. Long live the Communist Party of Cuba. Long live Marxism-Leninism. Long live proletarian internationalism. And today, we're going to take a look at what life is truly like in Socialist Cuba and the Caribbean sovereign nation of Cuba. We're going to talk about the advances of the Cuban Revolution from a Pan-African communist perspective. And joining me today is my comrade, my good friend, Salifu Mack. Salifu is a Pan-African socialist and editor at Hood Communist. Shout out to Hood Communist. Please make sure to follow, support, and check out Hood Communist, a member of the Black Alliance for Peace, BAP. Also, please support BAP, AAPRP, All African People's Revolutionary Party. Please make sure to love and support AAPRP. And last but not least, the Lowcountry Action Committee, which is a Black-led grassroots organization dedicated to Black liberation through service, political education, and collective action in the Lowcountry of South Carolina. And Comrade Salifu recently traveled to Cuba. I'm a little jealous because he was in the warm tropical beaches weather of revolutionary Cuba. And he was in Cuba with the IFCO Bastards for Peace on a friendshipment caravan carrying 2 tons of medical supplies from Miami to Cuba as a show of solidarity with the Cuban people, representing the vast majority of people in the U.S. who disagree with the illegal U.S. blockade on Cuba. Please make sure to read Comrade Salifu's diaries in Cuba. The link is in the description. And also, please make sure to read Comrade Salifu's article, a beautiful article on his experience in the Fidel Castro Memorial in Cuba for Hood Communist. Link is in the description below. Comrade Salifu, how's it going? Yeah, can you repeat that? Sorry, I think you're on mute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfect. How's it going?
I'm good, man. Thank you again for having me come through to be able to talk about my experiences in Cuba. Since I've been back, it's the only thing that I've actually wanted to do or talk about. So I'm hyped to do this.
No doubt. And you're in South Carolina, right? Or where are you based at again?
Yeah, I'm in South Carolina. Yep.
So I could imagine it's not exactly the safest place to talk about how great Cuba is, right? Or what is that like?
Yeah, but I don't give a fuck.
Right.
I genuinely don't. I think maybe safest is not the right word. I just think that at the present moment, there's not a lot of interest here.
Okay.
So it's not like Miami, but it's also not like a lot of people I know could even really necessarily even point to Cuba on a map for you.
Right. I could imagine ever since you've been back. I mean, when you travel to a socialist country, when you go to a nation that has liberated itself from imperialism, it's always a beautiful experience. And I'm sure part of you while you were out there were like, yo, I want to like stay here and I kind of like stay a little longer, maybe see what life is like. And I know it's something that's very beautiful and inspiring. I always, the word I like to use is rejuvenating or regenerative, if that's the word. Like Absolutely. Whenever you go to an anti-imperialist country, you remember why you're a communist, why you're revolutionary, why you're fighting for the international working class against the system of capitalism and imperialism. Because a lot of times, as my Rasta friends will say, in Babylon, in the belly of the beast, you forget, become so alienated. There's so many distractions. There's so much nonsense. But going somewhere like Cuba is something that is a beautiful experience. So maybe just start off telling us about when you went, why you went, and what was your overall experience like?
Yeah, for sure. So tomorrow will make 2 weeks since I've been back. I went with, as you mentioned earlier in the intro, IFCO Pastors for Peace. Pastors for Peace is an organization. So, and I guess I'll talk a little bit about why I went with that delegation. So Pastors for Peace as an organization, it has a long-standing relationship with not just the people of Cuba, but also various countries across Latin America. And the reason for that is because Pastors for Peace was started in the 80s by a black reverend in the U.S. His name was Lucius Walker. And Reverend Walker began doing solidarity delegations to Latin America during the Reagan presidency. And so just like for your viewers who probably know and understand, when we talk about the war on drugs here in the U.S., there's a big connection between what was happening in the Black community here in the U.S. And the funding of the Contras, who were in short words a terrorist organization in Nicaragua, and the United States was sponsoring them against the Sandinistas, who were the revolutionaries in Nicaragua. And so, as you can imagine, there's all kinds of propaganda that exists today across all the various like social media networks and television and radio and stuff that we have today. But propaganda at that time was just as intense. And so, as a Black man, as a Black man of faith in the U.S., Reverend Walker wanted to visit Nicaragua for himself to see and make sense of all these messages that he was getting from the government in the country that he lived in. And during his time in Nicaragua, the delegation that he took was a delegation of clergy, people of faith from the U.S. They were attacked by the Contras.
Wow.
Yeah. So just there to learn, visiting, so on and so forth, and were attacked by the Contras, and that experience opened his eyes to what the truth really was, who the Sandinistas really were, what they represented, and who the Contras were. And so upon return to the United States, he used his voice and his platform as a man of faith to renounce the United States actions in Nicaragua, to renounce President Reagan, to renounce imperialism. This is a time for a lot of Black people in the States, their first time even hearing that word. What is imperialism? He felt it personally. He felt himself personally responsible after having had an experience to actually start to talk in plain terms about what imperialism is. And so that was the first delegation in Nicaragua. And then from there, the delegations continued all across Latin America. And eventually in 1992, Pastors for Peace made their first delegation trip to Cuba. And Reverend Walker and Fidel formed a very close friendship. Such like you can still see pictures of the two of them together to this day, like Fidel in like the Adidas tracksuit and all that. But Reverend Walker, he passed away a few years ago after leaving this incredible legacy, and he ended up leaving it behind to his daughter, Reverend Gail Walker, who in Cuba, when we get to Cuba with Reverend Walker with Gail, she is received as if she is the president of the country that she's there from. It's incredible to see this like dark-skinned Black woman with dreadlocks be received so warmly and so openly in this country, because they understand that she represents so many of us here living in the United States that actually don't agree with imperialism, right? Like they try to make it seem like, everybody here is just totally cool with the things that are going on. That's not the case. The vast majority of people don't agree. And then there's also a huge majority of people who just simply don't understand. Sorry, I got kind of off track describing Pastors for Peace. But anyway, that's the delegation that I went with. We were there for 10 days. We spent 3 days in Miami, which was interesting, preparing orientation to go to Cuba, because when you take a delegation of 70-something people to a socialist country from the United States, there is a level of education and de-brainwashing that needs to be done for a lot of people in terms of the way that they think about a socialist country, and just in general, the way that the tourism industry of capitalist nations like teaches you to behave when you're in other people's countries, right? So we needed 3 days to all get on the same page about where we were going, what the history of this place was, and what our expectations were as people who are going to this place as visitors, right? Like that was like a huge part of it. And also to prepare the 2 tons of medical aid that we were taking with us. We did take 2 tons of medical aid, so medical equipment, bandages, medications, all that stuff. And it was great that we took those things, but Gail made sure to help us understand taking the medical aid itself wasn't the reason, like that we were taking it wasn't oh, like, you know, these poor Cubans don't have any medicine, so here come us as saviors to take this medicine. The medicine, it was the medical equipment and whatnot was more of a symbolic gesture, right? Of saying we're coming to be in your home for 10 days as you exist under this embargo, which is severely limiting the things that you have, and you're still going to find a way to give us things. So the least we can do is bring you things. So yeah, that's who I went with. We were there for 10 days. And just to quickly sum up what the experience was like for me and what it meant for me, I'll just say, Onye Sonu, who is another editor at Her Communist, she said before in the past that I thought I was an anti-imperialist, but then I went to Cuba, and that's what really made me an anti-imperialist. And I would say that's the exact same experience that I had too. I went having read all these things, having had all this conversation, having known all these people who have a revolutionary perspective of the history and the current reality in Cuba. But to go and see it for myself, you can't tell me shit about that country, about that nation, about their revolutionary process at all anymore. I don't even feel the need to even be slightly reserved or soft about how I talk about Cuba anymore. Like, no, straight up in the blockade on Cuba.
Most definitely. Beautifully said. And it's something that is right on, man. I mean, I think it's something that a lot of times first world liberal lefties, they kind of want to be silent on anti-imperialism. They'll only talk about domestic stuff, but they won't express solidarity with peoples like Cuba who are liberating themselves from U.S. imperialism. And it's something that is really important to point out. Shout out to Comrade Big Teal. That's so good to take those 3 days. You don't want to be the, quote, hated American terrorist. They can be the worst. Most definitely. By the way, if y'all have a question for Comrade Salifu in the chat, please just write it and we can ask the comrade about any questions you have about his experience there in Cuba, anything you're wondering about, economics, politics, history, anything like that. So just put it in the chat, and then later on we can ask. Touching on this topic about imperialist propaganda, and a lot of, especially within the last few months, because of the regime change operations, a lot of the gusanos, the right-wingers, especially in Miami, but also all over the U.S., have been trying to be bold and trying to be outspoken in their defense of imperialism. And in mainstream media, this has been repeated a lot. And what I want to do is I want to play a clip. This is from Al Jazeera. This is from a few weeks ago. Miami residents protest for a free Cuba. And these are, again, the right-wing Cubans in Miami who are for U.S. intervention, who are in favor of the blockade, who are in favor of placing a stranglehold on Black and brown working class families, mothers trying to feed their children, trying to give medicine to the sick. And this is a sense of the dominant narrative in mainstream media about Cuba. And then we're going to get your reaction, Comrade Salifu. So I'm going to play this.
Among Florida's large Cuban American population, the rallying cry of Free Cuba has long been a call for democracy on the communist-run island. Following anti-government protests in Cuba, those calls are growing as the exiled community across the US show support for Cubans facing the worst economic crisis in decades.
It doesn't matter whether you're born in Cuba, Cuban born or US born. If you're Cuban heritage and you love Cubans, because I know a lot of Colombians, Venezuela, and a lot of people that love Cuba, you got to understand what's going on and you have to support this. We are lucky to be able to do this here.
Emotions are running so high in Miami that some activists loaded up boats with supplies, planning to make the treacherous journey across the Florida Straits to Cuba. The US Coast Guard has warned against illegal crossings. The US Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, fled Cuba as a child and warned those potentially planning to leave Cuba not to come.
Migrants who do attempt to enter the United States by sea put their lives at incredible risk. The waters in the Straits of Florida and the Caribbean are dangerous, especially now as we have entered hurricane season. People will die.
Miami's Mayor Francis Suarez is calling for military intervention, saying the U.S. has an obligation to stand with the people of Cuba.
They've shut down the internet, they've shut down electricity, and they've gone out to the street to beat and to harm those who are protesting peacefully for freedom and liberty in their country.
Outside the White House, too, Cuban Americans are calling on the Biden administration to help. Military intervention isn't likely to happen, but Cuba's actions are being condemned.
Communism is a failed ideology, and we certainly believe that. It has failed the people of Cuba. They deserve freedom. They deserve a government that supports them, whether that is making sure they have health and medical supplies, access to vaccines, or whether they have economic opportunity and prosperity.
The demonstrations in Florida and across the country look likely to continue, even as the pressure on the Biden administration to directly help the Cuban people grows. What Cuban Americans see then is an opportunity, one that hasn't presented itself in decades. Many here who have family on the island say if the Cuban people are brave enough to take to the streets, then the US government should back them. What form that takes is unknown, but the refrain here is the time to help is now. Andy Gallagher, Al Jazeera, Miami, Florida.
They said the time to help is now. We need to go. One of these idiots had a sign that said, USA, help my people, Cuba. And the bride of Chucky, a.k.a. Jen Psaki, the State Department, the U.S. spokesperson, you know, she's trying to give a humanitarian Karen lens to U.S. imperialism, which I found interesting. Comrade Salifu, your reaction. This is what most mainstream media is saying about Cuba. You know, as somebody who just came from Cuba a few days ago, 2 weeks ago, your analysis and reaction to that.
Yeah. First thing I want to say is that's all a bunch of bullshit. And it's unfortunate that those people are able to control the dominant narrative in the U.S. I want to start by responding to that. I want to start responding to that by starting with my experience in Miami, just like even before getting to Cuba, right? We had gotten these really strict instructions in terms of coming to the airport about the kinds of things that we could wear, the kinds of things that we could have on our shirts, just coming into the airport in Miami, right? Because the understanding and expectation with flights opening up is that there's going to be some people who support the revolution coming through the airport. And so a big thing that our delegation did was they went through a lot of safety precautions with us, even from the times that we bought our tickets to get to the airport. We were instructed to like try to find tickets within this window so that we could be in the airport as a group and be shuttled out together. So just like even to think about having to go through those kind of gymnastics simply because you want to leave this country and go to another one it's like insane, right? But sorry. So I want to say with that the what do they call the exile community or the diaspora communities, the expat communities in Miami are fucking nuts. Right. So I want to start there and acknowledge that like these people are standing in the streets holding signs saying they want the United States to help their families or to save their country. These people don't give a fuck about Cuba, and they don't give a fuck about their families or the people that they call friends in Cuba. But I also want to add that while we were in Miami, I had the opportunity to be cared for by and housed, fed, transported by loving, caring, real Cuban expats, real people from Cuba who live in Miami for varying numbers of reasons, who have so much love for the country in their heart, have so much love for the people of Cuba in their heart, and who know that the revolution is a good thing, who understand that they are like significantly outnumbered in Miami, but who didn't allow fear to stop them from doing what they could to get the medical aid that we were taking with us to Cuba to ensure that we were safe during our time in Miami. And that was just very refreshing to me because expats in Miami should be concerned, honestly, about the image that they have. They look fucking crazy. Like they look and they sound crazy. You see these people on TV behaving in this way, and I don't think it clicks for them that y'all look and sound like fucking maniacs. But there is this really small number of people who exist in Miami, these real small revolutionary communities who can't be as loud as some of us can, who might not be able to, write things on their cars and participate in caravans and whatnot, even though there are, let me not generalize, there are definitely diasporic communities in Miami who also don't give a fuck and will fight these gusanos in the street. That is very much so a thing. I encountered some of that too. Some scrappy Cuban aunties that was ready to get down in the airport for us. But yeah, I just wanted to say that image that exists, that all of the Cubans who live in Miami are like against the Cuban government. They all want to see their people harmed and the Cuban Revolution brought down. It's also not true, right? But they make all this noise over here about how the people are so unhappy and socialism has failed and we need U.S. military intervention. And then you land in Cuba and the people are like, long live the revolution. You see Fidel. I got this picture of him right here. Like, I miss him so much. That was my dog. Like, that's really the energy that exists. And we landed on November 15, which was being hyped up as the day of reckoning. Like, this is going to be the day they're going to take it down. Socialism is coming to an end. People are fed up. Made no noise. They made no noise. Nothing happened. Literally nothing happened. The only things that happened were the demonstrations by proud Cubans who are like, we love our country, we respect our socialist project, and we want more of it. Like, I don't know if I don't know how big it got over here, but the youth, the students who went out and demonstrated with the red bandanas in Cuba, and were met by President Miguel Diaz-Canel, who I also had the opportunity to meet. And
wow, damn.
Too. But the
VIP over here, very important.
Listen, we were wrapped up in everything. But the young people, the students in Cuba are very much like, not only do we respect our socialist project, but we want more of it. We want to see the country take further steps towards socialism, right? Like, those were the kinds of demonstrations that existed and happened on 11/15, but the air and the energy was very much one of remembrance. Like, look where we came from and look where we are today, even despite all the bullshit that we've been through.
Beautiful. Wow, that's so amazing. I'm glad you made a distinction as well about Miami and the class nature of the Cuban diaspora. I think another important thing to point out is overwhelmingly the Gusano traders to the Cuban Revolution come from a white settler Criollo background from the Spanish, who obviously during times of slavery, which lasted for a long time in Cuba, benefited from the exploitation of Black and brown people on the island. And the racial nature as well. Like, you have to, obviously, that's not to say that every white Cuban is right wing and every Black Cuban is left wing. Not at all. But there tends to be a pattern, and this is how Marxism understands both race and class in its analysis. That when you have a nation, an African nation like Cuba, which it really is a African nation,
straight up.
It's like you have to recognize that the role of white supremacy and capitalism go hand in hand in being anti-communist and being racist. So a lot of these gusanos that I met in Miami, the right wing, the fascist ones, are so fucking racist, dude. And it's just crazy. I want to read through some of the chats. Shout out to Comrade Erica, Peace Comrades, and Comrade Only. The fit and the Cuban flag, looking fresh with the flag, with the poster. Shout out to David. Also, shout out to Comrade B-Level, quote unquote, if you love Cuba, bro, if you did, you'd be there building the revolution.
Or fighting to end the blockade.
Or fighting to, right. People always are like, oh, if you love it so much, why don't you move there? It's like, nah, man, I'm here to overthrow the U.S. empire that is imposing that blockade. And so I think that's a good point about understanding your role within the belly of the beast. Shout out to Comrade Fraud. Greetings from Nicaragua, comrades. Oh, shout out to Esteli. This comrade is actually from one of the regions that was heavily hit by the Contras, Esteli in the northwest. So this comrade is it has some really cool history and information about the Sandinista revolution. Shout out to Comrade Marian. Salifu be making it plain. Well said. Comrade Salifu is able to break down concepts that some stuffy academic would take like 3-4 essays to write. Big Teal, shout out to the revolutionary aunties. Most definitely. That's what the revolution is based off of, honestly. I mean, the role of, especially women, maybe later on we can talk about the committees for the defense of the revolution. Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about that, actually, before we get into some of the photos?
Yeah, I love to shout out the revolutionary aunties. You're right, because Onye also has this thing that she talks about. Onye, again, editor at Hood Communist, who was a big part of the reason why I ever became interested in Cuba and wanting to visit and see it for myself anyway, because I think she's probably like the #1 Cuban propagandist in the in the US right now. But one thing Onye always talks about when it comes to revolution is that it's always painted as this thing that like that dudes with guns do, right? And like while they're partially true, it's not entirely true. When you go to Cuba and you understand that Cuba is not a place that had a revolution that's over and they're like living at the end of the revolution. The revolution is ongoing. Like their revolutionary process continues today. And you have to understand that Cuba has a very intense level of organization, like from your block to your neighborhood, to your town, to your province. And the people that are the wheels of that, the people that are the glue of that, they look just like the ladies in your church. They're like, the volunteer at your school who like comes and like, I don't know, opens the milk for kids in the morning, who like prepare, sandwiches in the summertime for kids who are in summer school programs. Like that is the people who represent the committees for the defense of the revolution, the CDRs, that I'm talking about here. The organization was created in the 60s by Fidel Castro because he understood that if the wheels of the revolution were going to continue to turn, the people had to take an active part in maintaining that. And so what you see in Cuba across community, across province, across sector, whether we're talking about people's medical needs, the food being distributed, gas, making sure that children have things to do, that there's things to occupy the community, there's events constantly going. These are the everyday, ordinary people. It's like the most beautiful thing to go there and see, because here you hear about Cuban revolutionaries and you're like, oh, well, like, obviously, like in your brain, right? Like, obviously, it's like these men with these guns and they have like the Fidel hats. I forgot what they're called, but and like they're like all very serious all the time. When really it's just like everyday men and women who look like the men and women in your neighborhood who like love music, they love to dance, they love to cook. They're like very normal people who just believe in the revolution. And so that idea of like the revolutionary auntie is something that I'm just like really in love with, because I got a chance to meet so many of them who were like, I asked them, like, I had a chance to speak with one woman who was a CDR. She was there at this block party that the CDRs had while we were there, like cutting up watermelon, giving kids fruit, portioning out this soup that they had made for everybody that was there. And I got a chance to ask her, I was like, when did you like become a CDR? Like, when did this happen? And she told me, she was like, there's never been a moment, or I can't recall a moment where I've not been doing this, where I've like not been serving my community, where I've not been serving the revolution. So you grow up in this culture it's expected of you to be a part of the revolutionary process, and you reach a point in your life where it's just a part of who you are. It's just a part of your character, your personality, and what you represent. And so I'm very much like, I don't know, in love with how every day the revolution is in Cuba.
Beautifully said. As B-Level said, the revolution is driven by the everyday person. Conrad Bruno said, Gusanos always label those who participate in revolution as, quote, brainwashed and do not understand people with their own conscience and opinions and experience. CDR, Ill State Fishing, is Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, and it's one of the projects of socialism in Cuba that is very much also modeled after, similarly to the workers' councils that were established in the Soviet Union and in the People's Republic of China, where block by block, the Communist Party is organized. They have somebody who's at the head of the CDR, and they understand what the issues of the area are. And it's part of the Leninist strategy of mass line, of understanding what the needs are of the people, of being extremely connected to the masses. Because something that Kim Il-sung, the Korean revolutionary, once mentioned is that once you lose the backing of the masses of the people, any revolution, no matter how great it was, can fall if you're not 100% in tune with the masses, if the masses and the party become disconnected. So the purpose of the CDRs, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution, and there's also emulations of this in other countries as well. In Nicaragua, they have Sandinista councils. In China, they have the Communist Party offices, where you are in tune directly with the people. You find out what the issues of the community are before the imperialists and mainstream media do. And that's how you're able to squash it right away. You're able to feed the people, see if anybody has any needs. And I think it's a brilliant model for building revolution. And in this image, I see Comrade Salifu with the fresh chucks, the fresh khakis, and working hard with the handy mic, interviewing a lot of people. I'm sure you guys have some great content that you were able to record. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this picture? Also, for those who are listening, it's a banner: IFCO Passage for Peace, 31st Friendship Caravan, posters that say Cuba's not alone, Cuba, Viva Cuba, hands off Cuba. How did you feel at this moment? First of all, where was this, and how did you feel at this moment?
All right, dude, this was literally just stepped off the plane in Havana. And wow. As soon as we got off the plane, there was like cameras everywhere, because you got to understand, and I guess put into context, that this is sort of the first time that Cuba's open during our trip is open. This is like the first day of this opening. So the word spread fast that there were going to be like outsiders, like, you know, here for the first time since the pandemic really got started. And so lots of news, lots of media. It was also a really emotional moment because there are members of our caravan who have been going on the caravan damn near since it started in 92 in Cuba. That 31 years is in reference to even when it was started back in the 80s with Nicaragua. But like I said, 92 is when Passage for Peace started going into Cuba. And so there are people who have made friendships and relationships on the island. These are people who they haven't seen in almost 2 years. So coming off the plane, there was an arrangement sort of made between Passage for Peace and, you know, the Cuban government, that those people who want their friends wanted to come in and greet them coming off the plane. They did. It was very emotional for a lot of people. Lots of people cried. It was like a lot of hugging. And so, yeah, this was our first steps. This is like, I'm like there and like, yeah, you can see me, but what you can't like get from this picture is that I'm like literally breathing in real deep, because this is my first time out of the country. So I'm like, I want to know.
Really?
Yeah, I'm like, does the air taste different out here? Like, what, like is gravity different? Like, what's good? I'm trying to like take it all in. And I wasn't even prepared for this first night for all the beauty that I was going to see in the days to come.
That's so beautiful, man. Their first trip out of the country to Cuba. What a great choice. It's crazy. I was talking about this with my girlfriend Ophelia. So many times I've tried to go to Cuba. Something has always come up. I was actually supposed to go again this February, but I just started a program that does not allow me to travel right now. So for school, so it's crazy, but hopefully I will get to see it. I could imagine how happy and excited you were, and even the air, like even when you're especially in the global South, just the smell of the air, the cleanliness, and it's a whole different vibe. And I could imagine it's so beautiful. Let me just read some of the comments here. Comrade Erica said, Ches speaks of this, referring to the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution in Socialism and Men, that the masses are the movement, not any individual. Exactly. Also, Comrade Bruno said, Gusanos also try to brush off the importance of the blockade and say that Cuba can trade with people outside the U.S. Can you guys go into detail why that is not the case? Maybe Comrade Salifu, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest lies that was told around the time that they started that bullshit in July. You have people online saying, oh, the blockade doesn't affect food or medicine though. So like as it's to suggest that like, oh, you know, the blockade is only like preventing people from getting PlayStations or some dumb shit like that. But the blockade absolutely does impact every single area of life in Cuba. And it's not just the fact that they cannot trade with the United States, but also that other countries are penalized, right, for trying to participate in trade with Cuba. So for an example of that is if your ships dock in Cuba, you can't dock in U.S. ports for like 6 months after that. Most countries cannot afford to take a hit like that, right? When you're talking about the world hegemonic power, or like the power that sort of economically and militarily and politically is dangling the rest of the world like by its strings. You can't afford to, like most countries can't afford to go up against the US in that way. And I'll probably talk about this a little bit later, but Cuba is able to sort of try to navigate ways out and do trade with other places, but it's incredibly expensive. Again, you're talking about countries in the global south that have been intentionally underdeveloped by the global north, right? They're not like poor because people are backwards or unable to get their shit together. It's intentionally been created this way. Everything about the wealth, about the luxury that people think they have in the global north, our everyday existence is built on pillaging and like ripping resources from these places in the global south. And when they try to stick together or band together to help each other, they're punished by the world powers. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
I think that's such a great breakdown, because one of the flaws that capitalist ideology promotes is that every nation and every people has an equal starting point, and they don't understand that the wealth of one nation, as somebody like Walter Rodney explains very well in How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, is that the wealth of Europe and North America and the imperialist countries is based on the plundering and exploitation of African peoples, Asian peoples, Latin American peoples. And for Cuba, even though it has had these tremendous gains in social development, economic development, there's still so many challenges that exist because of imperialism and not because of socialism. And it's not like you get a magic wand right when you take power and you can say like, oh, you know, we're going to do everything we want right away. You're still operating within the global free market system, and you're forced to contend with market forces in a way that can be very devastating. So for those of you listening, this is a picture of Comrade Salifu with the sign in the back that says Abdallah. I think this is something related to COVID-19 and the vaccine. Maybe if you want to just walk us through where you were here, what was going on, and how you felt at this moment.
Yeah, for sure. So in this picture, we're at the Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology in Havana. And the woman that's in the picture here, I feel terrible because I can't remember her name, but she was one of the leaders in Cuba in developing the Abdallah vaccine, which is sort of the one of the more popular of the five that Cuba was able to develop on their own through the use of their science, medical technology expertise that they've been able to build up over the past few decades. And while we were there, what we really got to do was have conversations with the scientists who developed the vaccine and who are also developing like a flurry of other things and have developed a flurry of other things that I could talk about quickly. So here I want to make clear that there's a difference between scientific and medical development in socialist societies as opposed to the way that things are developed in capitalist societies, right? And this was demonstrated, I think, best we had a caravanista who stood up to ask the question, how do Cuban scientists and doctors tackle medical mistrust or mistrust of the scientific communities and research and vaccines and things like that in Cuba. And the look of confusion on these people's faces when he asked that, because all they could say was, we don't have that. Like that the thing that you're saying about people not trusting science or medical people, like, it doesn't make sense. And it's because Cuba doesn't have a capitalist healthcare industry. So there's no history of medicines being withheld from people or people being experimented on. There's no profit motive, right? So people don't have to make up these conspiracy theories that, like, oh, you're either trying to take money from me or you're trying to give me something that I'm then going to have to pay for. That profit motive, it doesn't exist. So that whole idea of a conspiracy of being hoodwinked by science or medicine, like, it doesn't occur to most people. What that does also in terms of like what developing medicines or science in a socialist economy means is that the development of drugs, of medical procedures and medical equipment is literally about the sustaining of your people. It's about helping people stay alive, helping people stay safe, making sure people don't die, making sure that people are having the best quality of life possible, and not about making money. So it allows you to be more creative. There's this myth that under socialism, there's no incentive to innovate. But let's be honest, these are lies that are told to people about socialism who don't really understand what socialism is. In the United States right now, we have Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. Those are like the three sort of main vaccines that we have, right? They're all what are considered mRNA vaccines. In Cuba, they have the incentive, the socialist incentive to innovate. So they have not only developed vaccines for COVID-19, but they are also innovating toward treating COVID-19. So they are now in the testing phases for nasal sprays, right? That would work as treatments for people with sort of light COVID symptoms. They're working on an injection treatment, an injectable treatment. I'm sorry, that would work to cure people who are experiencing some of the worst COVID symptoms, right? So we're talking about people with that chronic loss of smell and taste, people with that like foggy memory, the all those like really nasty side effects that are associated with long-term COVID. They're now pushing into developing treatments for those things because they got the vaccine thing taken care of a long time ago, and there was no emphasis on a scramble for how we can hoard this and like charge people to get it. When it came out, they created sort of like a templatized understanding of how we should be approaching the pandemic. This understanding was given to the CDRs on like a local community level, and you have a seamless stream of information coming from the top directly into your community, right? So that's just a little bit about the innovations that that they've been able to make sort of in their medical sector, right? In their science sector. But I think another thing that people would in the US would be sort of shocked to understand, and something that they spent a lot of time getting us to understand about the Cuban healthcare model, is that it's not based on just treating things. Like, you don't just drop people into a society, give them shit to eat, give them shit air to breathe, give them like shit water to drink, create no opportunities for them to exercise or use their bodies, make treatment unaffordable. So when you start to feel sick, you're terrified to go to the hospital, terrified to call an ambulance because you don't want a $500,000 medical debt over your head. No, socialism says clear all of that. Let's take all of that out and let's develop a model that's based on prevention, right? So a huge part of what Cuba had to tackle with their COVID crisis was not even necessarily related to sort of all the like pre-existing things that we're dealing with here in the US, they were able to get things under control very quickly because they have a population that already has access to healthcare. I'm sorry, I rambled a little bit there, but there's just like a lot to take in talking to these doctors about how they're able to do what they do. And one of the things that really stood out to me as an African person in the US, my community has a huge warranted mistrust of the medical system. As soon as they said they were coming out with vaccines, I'm vaccinated, but even as soon as they came out with them, even I was like, I don't know if I'm getting that shit.
Yeah.
You know, and there's been this huge push in the United States to shame people, particularly targeting African and other colonized communities in the US who share that history of medical mistrust right alongside us, right? Trying to shame us for not wanting to trust the science and telling us that we're stupid and we're going to be the reason why. And the pandemic of the unvaccinated, as you know, the US State Department and Fauci, his bitch ass, even though everybody loves him, all these people who are responsible handlers of the pandemic, right? The punching down of colonized communities in the United States for our mistrust of this thing. And the number one thing that I kept thinking about as we're talking to all these scientists and these doctors is that nothing short of a revolution in the United States is going to change our people's relationship to these systems. It is just another reason why people have to understand revolution is good and it is necessary, because under capitalism, you are never going to assuage the fears that people have about being experimented on or being excluded from the medicines that they need, because on a day-to-day basis, you cannot negate the experiences that we are having inside a capitalist medical system.
Wow. Very powerful. And I'm 100% in accordance with you, in agreement with you, because one of the things that I really hated was how a lot of, especially white liberal lefties, were like talking shit about Black and brown people for being hesitant against the jab, because they were like, oh, like, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're crazy. It's like, no, like, look at Tuskegee, right? You had the Center for Disease Control openly for 40 years purposefully infecting Black people in the South and with syphilis and doing all these experiments. We know about Operation Paperclip and how former Nazi scientists were pardoned by the US government, sent to the US to work for these healthcare systems. Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Moderna, all these big companies. It's not that I'm anti-vax, I'm anti-capitalist medicine, anti-capitalist in control of our health, of our food. Johnson & Johnson has been knowingly putting carcinogenics in baby powder that has made babies sick, especially Black babies. So this is something that is open knowledge, right? Anybody can find this. And I would much rather take a Cuban vaccine or a Chinese or Russian vaccine than a US vaccine. And I think it's important to make that distinction. I was really disappointed to see how many people on the left were just attacking people, Black and brown people, for being skeptical, right? Being hesitant, because of course that shit is experimented on as we speak. Black and brown people have been continually experimented on. You know, one of the books, Henrietta Lacks, like all these different people who throughout history have been used. And so we have to be sensitive of that. Cuba, obviously, a healthcare system not run on profit. It's no giant pharmaceutical company. And this is the brilliance of socialism, is that you can't have the free market. You can't have greed, selfishness, and profit guide something like people's health, man. Like people, how they breathe, how they eat, that has to be run by the people, centrally planned in a way that benefits all. So I think if I was in Cuba, I definitely would have wanted to do that myself, you know, because I think it's something that is really important to have the sensibility to understand. This other picture I want to share. This is you, I think, at the Centro Fidel Castro Rus, the Fidel Castro Center, you with a group of other comrades. Tell us about this experience and how that was for you.
Yeah, so looking at this picture, it's making my heart feel so warm. All right, so in this picture, we started out calling ourselves the Communist Youth Brigade. So these are some of the young people that were a part of my delegation. And we all sort of gravitated toward each other because of the nations, the cultures, and the causes that we represent. So the people in this picture, they represent Palestinian youth in the United States who live in exile and they want their homeland to be free. We have Chicano people in this picture who fight every day for undocumented people in the United States. And we had some really emotional conversations during our brigade in terms of health and science and medicine about how undocumented people have been discarded in the vaccine conversations in terms of the ill treatment that they received. Really emotional conversations there. We have white working class people from the U.S. who look at the conditions of their communities in the South, for example, and are like, we have to organize our way out of this. We have to show our people, we have to come and learn the information that we can take back to challenge these reactionary positions that our communities hold. Who else do we have here? We have feminists, Black feminists from Miami who are all let's take down the patriarchy. You know what I mean? And we have folks from the West Coast who are thinking deeply about immigration and what that means. So you have all these young people. Our delegation was of 71 people, but here in this picture, you have us who kind of came together on the basis of these things that we have in common, this vision of like a new world that we all hold. Obviously, you have me, a Pan-Africanist who wants to see Africa united and socialist for all African people around the world. And during the course of our 10 days, we were able to exchange so much on ideologies. I had conversations with people who had never heard like a breakdown of Pan-Africanism before. I got to learn so much about Palestine, so on and so forth. But I say all that to say the delegations are great. I recommend them for anybody who wants to travel the world but doesn't want to do so through like the tourist economy, because what this allowed for us to do was to come together on the basis of organizing. And now we're having conversations about how we coalesce, how do we create coalitions around our issues, our causes, to do the kind of work that we want to do. So this was taken at the beginning of our tour of the Centro Fidel Castro, which is a new museum that's been built in Havana in honor of Fidel. I wrote about this on Hood Communist. So
link is in the description, by the way, for anybody who wants to check that out.
Yeah, definitely check that out. I wrote about it because it was a very emotional part of the trip for me. It was probably my favorite part of the trip. Because I wrote about it, I would try not to dwell on it too much here. But the main thing that I think people should know about this center is that with the rise of capitalist media into Cuba, because Cuba is having to do certain things to stimulate its economy, to sort of be a part of the larger world, there's this capitalist propaganda being pushed from Miami into Cuba, whether it's WhatsApp, whether it's Twitter, the awful ass conversations people be having on Twitter and whatnot, that's trying to get Cuban people to think about their history, their righteous struggles as one of state propaganda. And what this center is trying to do is to take back the narrative and remind a new generation of Cubans, young people who are never going to have the chance to meet Fidel, of just exactly where Cuba comes from, what contributions Fidel made to the revolution, why the revolution was necessary, and why so many people in Cuban society would give their last breath to ensure that the revolution never dies.
Sorry, I was on mute. Beautifully said. And there's another video that you sent me that I thought was really powerful. I'm going to play this clip, and then maybe Comrade Salifu, you can talk about what was going on here. beautiful apartment complex. People chill. I think that's the humanity of it. Seeing people like not glued to their phones, just like hanging out, having a good time. For those of you who are listening, it was an apartment complex. There's some Cuban flags, flags of the Movimiento de Julio, 26 de Julio, the revolutionary flag. And also, I think it was some sort of event. What exactly was going on?
Yeah. So this is in Matanzas, which is sort of a more rural area in Cuba. And man, all the stuff is so beautiful. Seeing that video just made me like, okay. So basically, this is what you were looking at in that video. All in that video, what you see is what looks like apartment complexes, and they kind of go all around and sort of like a rectangle. So what we were told was that we were leaving to go meet some of the CDRs just to have like an intimate conversation about what they do. And when we pulled up on our bus, the CDRs had organized this huge block party for us. So in the video, what you see is people all around, people hanging out of their windows. Like imagine that these buildings go up like 11 or 12 stories, right? You see people just hanging out their windows, holding the flag, 26 de Julio, pictures of Fidel, pictures of Che. And we were arriving at this block party organized by the CDRs, the Committees for the Defense of the Revolution. Again, these are people across Matanzas who can make one phone call each and turn 300 or 400 people in one area in a matter of like 15 to 20 minutes. This is like a level of organization that is unseen or unheard of in the United States because we are so disconnected from each other. Intentionally, we are forced to be that way. Even in areas where we live ass to ass on each other, we don't have that sense of community and that sense of connectedness. What this block party represented was an opportunity for people in Matanzas to show and demonstrate to us their culture, their dances, the songs that they sing, the instruments that they play. It was an opportunity for youth in the community to just come out and hang out with each other at this kind of not celebrating the end, but celebrating a moment in Cuba where almost 90% of the country eligible is vaccinated, that kids just got an opportunity to go back to school because in Cuba, they did not rush them back into schools. It's really recalibrating from a moment. And in Matanzas was an area that was hit the hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic. And in a short matter of time, they were able to turn it around and save their population. So this block party was a huge celebration for the people, and they surprised us with that. And I think one thing that I don't want to get lost is that we were there, we saw all these beautiful things, we had a great time, the people were beautiful, everybody was hospitable. I think that's the word, hospitable, something like that. But Cuba in this moment is having a really hard time because of the blockade. There's all kinds of shortages across the island, but the only reason why people are able to continue on their days with dignity is because of the intense levels of organization that exist across the country. These are the intense levels of organization that mean that there's gonna be an old lady that comes and knocks on your door holding a tray of eggs like this, like y'all good in there? Everybody got something to eat? You know what I mean? Because the intense levels of organization of men who will knock on your door at 1 o'clock in the morning because they hear your husband in there yelling at you and they want to make sure that you're good. These really intense levels of concern and community and organization that ensured that even because of the blockade preventing them from having access to growing the kind of foods that they want, having access from getting gas and causing like electric blackouts and all these kinds of things, it means that nobody is starving. It means that everybody is housed, right? It means that people who are struggling with addiction are getting treatment. And so that block party was a display, a celebration of all the people of the Matanzas responsible for making sure that day to day people have their needs met.
It looks just an amazing environment too. It's so beautiful. And it's funny, Bruno had a funny comment, said, how terrible that Cubans aren't stuck in their computers and go outside and enjoy life. And Non-Standard Proletarian said, It's terrible. They have no advertisements. How will they know whether to buy Pepsi or Coke? Yo, and the crazy thing is, how was that? Yeah, tell us about that.
No ads, no KFC, nobody trying to sell you shit that you don't need. It's just like you look at people in the eye. Everybody has on a mask. People aren't like headphoned out of existence. It's just like being in like a normal world. I don't know. It's like that meme where it's like the world, if the United States were to cease to exist. It's like almost that meme, right? Like it's like you see how close they are to building model societies, and like then you realize you're about to go back to the country that's preventing them from taking their vision all the way. So yeah.
Most definitely. And Comrade Only. Shout out to Comrade Only, by the way. Mad respect for Comrade Only. He does amazing work with AAPRP, Venceremos Brigade, Hood Communists. Comrade Only is everywhere. I don't know how she gets sleep or rest, but she puts in mad work. Comrade Only said, Cuba is building the world that people on the left here say they want to see and does not get recognition for that. Too many tailing the empire's lies on Cuba.
Absolutely.
Very, 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 very true. A lot of these latte liberal, soy lefty, they're not even really left wing, but they're just kind of like Democrat people. They're all like, you know, they talk
all
about
things are bad.
Right. They're like
carceral state. Like
it's
shut up.
It's authoritarian. It's too dictatorial, and it's just like, yo, like if you're not, you know, I think it's like Frederick Engels said, like revolution is by nature forceful. Like you're gonna be authoritarian against the ruling class, and it's something that Cuba understands very well. I mean, they continue to be under attack for over 60 years now. It's like, imagine for over 60 years, your economy is purposefully being attacked and destroyed, blockaded by U.S. imperialism. Terrorist groups are being sent, like the Bay of Pigs and all these other mercenaries to attack your country, all these things. And it's like, of course, you're going to have to take certain security preventative measures to protect your people. So that, you know, that's something that I think people have to really keep in mind. But Comrade Salifu, just
make a revolution and then you have to defend it. You don't just like take power and then everybody goes skipping off into the woods together, rainbows in a stream. Like you have to defend the revolution. Yeah.
Turn on the light. Yeah, that's the thing. And that's kind of the interesting part. And maybe in a future stream we can talk about this. But one of the interesting things is like the whole counterculture hippie movement. In many ways, as part of the CIA, was used as a counterweight to like the Cuban Revolution and Marxism, Leninism, which in a way advocates for like, you know, it's not a peace-loving thing where you're just going to automatically reconcile with your enemy. Like there is going to be some tough decisions that have to be made after the revolution. And in many ways, a sort of liberal hippie counterculture thing was used to try to be like, oh, we're anti-capitalist, but we don't want to be like Cuba, like those bad guys, you know? So it's just crazy to see that how that psychological operation continues to be used. I want to play one last clip from one of the videos you sent me, beautiful video. And then we'll wrap up here talking about your experience in Cuba. Beautiful video, heartwarming to see young children, young African girls being able to dance, being able to be supported by the government. Meanwhile, in the U.S., they're attacked by police. They are victimized, criminalized, in poverty. And here you have a state that provides programs, dancing. What is life like for young children in Cuba, for women, especially young African women and African women in general?
Yeah, so I'm about to attempt to talk about something that I feel a lot of people in the U.S. might not be able to understand, because the context of race in Cuba is just so different than what we understand here in the US, right? We have two countries that have gone down very converging paths when it comes to reconciling with their history of slavery, right? And their relationship to Africa. I want to preface everything I'm about to say by saying that you said it earlier. Cuba is an African nation. They're like point blank, period. There is no way around it. This is not me just going there and then seeing a bunch of people like me and being like, oh, there's a lot of black people, so it must be an African nation. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that out of the mouths of the people, as professed by the state, as professed by Fidel himself, Cuban people acknowledge Africa as a part of who they are. It is a part of everything about what it means to be a Cuban, in terms of the food, in terms of the music, in terms of the traditions. And unlike the United States, Cuba has gone a long way to reconcile its history with slavery in material ways, not just simply saying it's the original sin of our country, but actually fighting right on its own land for that to rectify that, and fighting in Africa. So Cuba has a great deal of respect for Africa as a place, not just some like amorphous idea of like Black Lives Matter, but like we respect Africa. The United States does not respect Africa. It actually quite despises Africa. And if it could just take everything in Africa and kill all the people, it would. That is not the relationship that Cuba has to Africa on a material level. So the relationships are different, right? So when I talk about African people inside of Cuba, you also have to understand that for a long time, that distinction doesn't even make sense to people, because everybody's, for the most part, is like, I like met people in Cuba who in the US would not be considered Black, but would tell me straight out of their mouths, Africa is in me, right? So there's that distinction that you have to bridge. But then, okay, let's say we're talking about phenotype, race, like who are the Afro-Cubans, these Afro-descendant people, right? I'm not going to sit here and profess and tell you that as an African from the United States, I can tell you everything about the Afro-descendant experience in Cuba. But what I will tell you is that they have a firm handle on their reality. They know exactly where they've come from. They know exactly what the experiences are that they've had in Cuba, and they have a very clear roadmap for where they want to go. And that experience of moving along that roadmap with support from the state is not something that I can tell you I have ever experienced as an African in the United States, because my agenda is the exact sort of antithesis of the US agenda. What I want, what would sustain me, what would make me happy, what would make me free, is a direct threat to the existence of the United States. So the relationship, for a lot of people, it will not click. Even what I'm saying right now, there's somebody that's going to watch this as like an Afro pessimist or something like that, that's going to be like, anti-Blackness is global, and you're just trying to ignore the signs, and you don't want to hear the truth. And it's like, no, you just can't understand, love. I'm sorry, it's not going to connect in your brain, right? In that video that you just saw, those young girls, they look like my little cousins, but they're free. Like they're free children. They're free to the extent that, living in a country that's being blockaded from the entire world, like that, as much as that can exist, right? And when the United States takes its boot off of Cuba, they're going to be even more. They're going to be even more free. I had the opportunity to meet some brilliant Afro-descendant people in Cuba who represented the Yoruba faith. They represented queer Christians. They represented Black journalists. And their understanding of the society that they're in is almost as if they kind of feel like, not even kind of, they feel bad for me as the African from the United States. Does that make sense? They're like their frame of reference for understanding me in a lot of ways is like George Floyd, police brutality, all these really fucked up things that are related to the African experience in the US. But while I was in Cuba, I got to see and taste a little bit of what it's like to exist in a society where on a structural, like on a systemic level, African people are respected. Now I say structural and systemic because the Afro pessimists are going to watch this and they're going to be like, you're lying. So there's no racists in Cuba. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that racist attitudes and structural racism are two completely different things, right? And so when you talk about representation here in the US, for example, we went on a bunch of tours, we went to a bunch of places, and we ended up having a conversation where an African from the US asked, like, basically, I don't see enough Black people in positions of power. And when is Cuba going to have a Black president? And an Afro-descendant Cuban got up behind him on the mic and started going off. He was like, first of all, we are represented everywhere in every level of Cuban society. But also this question of representation that you ask, I beg you to be more cautious. Because remember Batista, right? Because if people understand the history, Batista was lauded at the time as a person of color that was in charge of the country. And he was a straight up op. He was a straight up mark. He was running Cuba into the ground like sugar, casino, plantation. Didn't give a fuck about the people of color or the African people in Cuba. And so what the Africans in Cuba who I've encountered, what they're thinking about is representation on a different wavelength. It's not representation for the sake of just being seen. It's the politic. Are you a communist? Do you support the Cuban Revolution? These are the questions that they've been able to create space to ask. What is the ideology here of the person, and letting that be their guide in which they determine who is a friend of the Africans in Cuba and who is an enemy of the Africans in Cuba. And they absolutely know who their enemies are, and they are organized enough to do something about it. A huge lesson that Africans in the US could learn, as opposed to letting ourselves be used to push the anti-revolutionary agenda in Cuba. We should learn what it means to properly understand who your enemies are and move accordingly.
Beautifully said. I think that's something that's very powerful. And by the way, the person who we're looking at on the screen, for those of you who are listening, is one of the highest ranking, most respected revolutionaries of the Cuban Revolution, Juan Almeida Bosque, who was born in 1927 and sadly passed away in 2009. He's one of the OGs of the Cuban Revolution from beginning to end. He's somebody who was there with Fidel, with Che, with Raúl, on Granma, everything. He saw everything, eventually joining the Cuban Communist Party, overseeing the development, overseeing also the solidarity brigades to the continent of Africa, to Angola, to Mozambique. Is somebody who has commented about the necessity of the Cuban Revolution supporting African revolutionaries in their struggle against settler colonialism and imperialism, and somebody who stayed and played a very important role in Cuba up until his death in 2009. So, and he, by the way, Juan Almeida Bosque, was honored with the title Hero of the Republic of Cuba, one of the highest titles, and the Order of Máximo Gómez. So he's somebody that is very highly revered. And also Antonio Maceo, who is an Afro-Cuban who fought against the Spanish colonizers as well. So the Cuban government does recognize and is part and parcel. Africans are part of the Cuban Revolution. And just because a president or one particular person that we are only seeing in media is not African, that doesn't mean that the base of the Cuban Revolution is not African, because without African revolution, there is no Cuban revolution. And I think that's something that the Cuban people understand.
They are the revolution.
They are the revolution, exactly. And I think, as Comrade Salifu pointed out, they're one and the same, and you can't understand one without the other. And it's important also to be aware of that, because a lot of the propaganda, I don't know if you saw, by the way, Comrade, the Latin Grammys, the fucking bullshit nonsense, how this group, Gente de Zona, and the people who were supported by the USAID, the San Isidro movement, hip hop. So now they're trying to use African people, to use Black Lives Matter, to use Patria y Vida, to try to like brand this as an anti-racist movement against the Cuban Revolution. I even saw some people say something like Black Lives Matter in Cuba, end the dictatorship. Like, they're trying to blend this. So your kind of final thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. This is the thing that I will say about all of that, because we were able to get some updates on what was happening at the Latin Grammys while we were there. We didn't have lots of internet access as like internationals who didn't have SIM cards or whatever. So also clarifying a lot of that, the government, the Jim Paskey, the orange hair lady,
the bride of Chucky.
Exactly, the bride of Chucky. He's talking about how the Cuban government be cutting off the internet. Nobody's cutting off anything. First of all, people have access to the internet. But so we were able to get some updates on that whole Latin Grammys thing and how this is like an anti-racist movement. I feel like for anybody who, before you partake in any of that propaganda against Cuba, against the Cuban Revolution, read some history. Learn and understand for yourself what the experience of African people was in Cuba prior to the Cuban Revolution. I want you to like go read Gerald Horne's Race to Revolution. I want you to go watch a YouTube video about the Batista dictatorship. I want you to really understand, because I had an opportunity to sit and hear from Black elders in Cuba who talked about the reality of being a Black person in Cuba prior to the revolution and how they feel that they are taking their place. They have taken their place in society. And I want you to reckon with what happens if you allow yourself to be used as a tool against the Cuban Revolution, and by some chance, because I don't see it happening, but by some chance, the Cuban Revolution is overcome or defeated on the basis of some color revolution anti-racist agenda. I want you to understand how far back you are going to set the Afro-Cuban people that you claim to care and want to advocate on behalf of, how far back you're going to set them, what that reality is going to look like. And then I want you to selfishly understand that if we understand that African people across the world are in different stages of our revolutionary process, I want you to understand that Afro-Cubans are absolutely in an advanced stage to us, right? They've already won the right to healthcare, to free healthcare. They've already won the right to free education. They've already won a society in which they can participate democratically. So they've already won the right to housing. These are all things that in the US, African people, we don't fucking have homes. We don't own anything. We can't afford to go to school. We can't afford to see a doctor. They are in an advanced stage of their revolution. If you set them back, you're not only setting them back, you are setting yourself back, because Cuba is one of the most important examples for African people that exist in the world today. We should all look to Cuba with so much love and admiration and ask the question, what can we do to advance that struggle? Because when we advance the Cuban struggle, we advance our own struggle. And to work against the Cuban Revolution is to work against yourself. I don't care how much you liberals claim to love Black people or claim to be anti-racist. Anti-communism is never going to succeed. And so I say all that, I'm gonna wrap this up by saying, even though I posed all those hypotheticals just now about what would happen if you set Cuba back, I also want everybody to understand that you should think a little less of yourself, because there's nothing that you're going to do that's going to cause the people of Cuba to give up on their revolution. They started it and they are determined to finish it. 60 years of the blockade has not won. In 60 years of the blockade, they have not moved the needle. They are not going to move the needle. The Africans in Cuba, the non-Africans in Cuba, the women in Cuba, the disabled people in Cuba, the queer people in Cuba, all these segments of the population, they know They're never giving that revolution up. And so at the end of the day, I want you to understand positionality. What can you do from where you are? If you care about women in Cuba, if you care about Africans in Cuba, if you care about disabled people in Cuba, or whatever group of people that you're claiming to want to advocate on behalf of in Cuba, if you care about them, support their path to revolution. That is all you can do from the United States. You will never change a policy position in Cuba. You will never change an economic decision. You will never make an economic decision in Cuba. Focus on your president, Joe Biden, and Vice President Kamala Harris, who have the power by executive order to end the blockade on Cuba any day now. They can. The majority of the people in the United States want them to, but they won't. And you need to ask constantly, why is the United States so invested in this blockade? Why is the United States so invested in ruining the Cuban Revolution? If socialism and communism is a dead project, like the Bride of Chucky said in that video, then just lift the blockade and let it die. That's my thing. If it's dead, just lift the blockade and let it die. If communism is a failure, just let communism fail, right? So these are the questions that we need to be asking in the United States and doing our part. People in Cuba don't want to hear. I mean, I'm not going to say that. People in Cuba have lots of criticisms of their revolution that they are discussing openly in forums that they have designed for themselves that will democratically hear and apply the criticisms that they have. People living under a blockade caused by your country aren't interested in your critiques of their revolutionary process. They want to know what you are doing to help them. So that's all I'm going to say. And I'm saying that because I feel it and I mean it. I'm really charged up because it's one thing to understand this theoretically, but it's another thing to go there and build relationships with people and see people who I now feel responsible for. I want to use my bare hands to end the blockade on Cuba. I will do anything that is required of me to do that at this point, because I've seen what it represents. I've seen what it could mean. I've tasted it. Obi says this all the time. Brother Obi Egbuna, he says it all the time. And me and Erica at Hood Communist, we're always talking about this clip where he's like, you can't relate because you've never seen freedom. You've never tasted freedom. You've never drank free and sovereign water. I tasted it. I saw it like with my own eyes. It's real. You can't tell me it's not real anymore. And I want it. I want it. I see those kids dancing in that video. I want that for my little cousins. I hear Africans in Cuba talking about what it means to just be able to go to the doctor to get treated for something. I want that for my aunties. I saw African people standing in line to go get treatment for addictions and these kinds of things, and knew that they wouldn't have to pay a dime, and knew that they were going to get effective treatment. I want that for my people. I want that for my people everywhere. And Cuba's already started. So I want to see them go further so the rest of us can catch up. That's it. I'm sorry, Ramiro.
No, beautiful discourse, speech. I feel the electrical vibe. I feel the energy. And I think it's something that's so beautiful. And I think it's something like Comrade Obi said, that you only feel when you get a taste of revolution, that electrification, that spark that even Lenin talked about. That is the energy of the revolution. It's beautiful. It's internationalism. And I think that I'm so happy that you got to go. I'm looking forward to all of the content that you're producing. You already have the great articles. Please check out Comrade Salifu's Diaries in Cuba. The link is in the description. And also article on Fidel Castro's memorial for Hood Communists. Link is in the description. So much passion, as everybody's mentioning, revolutionary fire. Hopefully we can go to Cuba together sometime and chill, and that would be a beautiful experience. We spoke with Comrade Salifu, Pan-African Socialist editor at Hood Communist. Shout out to Hood Communist, member of Black Alliance for Peace, AAPRP, Lowcountry Action Committee. So many amazing groups. Also IFCO and Pastors for Peace, with whom he traveled on the delegation, the caravan, to Cuba to bring medical supplies. Comrade Salifu, any last thoughts before we head out?
Thank you for having me. Let me come on and pop my shit. I really appreciate it. This is the only thing I can think about. It's the only thing I've been productive in trying to do since I got back. So any opportunity I get the chance to talk about the project that's happening in Cuba, I'm gonna take it.
Most definitely, Comrade. We'd love to have you back on soon. I hope all is well with you and your family. Thank you for everybody for watching and listening. We're going to go out to some revolutionary music. One of my favorite artists, Víctor Jara, Son para Cuba, a revolutionary song for Cuba. Peace, everybody. Comrade Salifu, thank you so much. Look forward to talking to you soon, man. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Peace, y'all.
Yo a Cuba le cantara una canción, tendría que ser un son revolucionario, pie con pie, mano con mano, corazón a corazón, corazón a corazón, pie con pie, mano con mano. ¿Cómo se le habla a un hermano? Si me quieres, aquí estoy. ¿Qué más te puedo ofrecer? Sino continuar tu ejemplo. Comandante, compañero, viva tu revolución. Si quiere conocer a Martí y a Fidel, si quiere conocer los caminos del Che, si quiere tomar ron pero sin Coca-Cola, si quiere trabajar en la caña de azúcar, en un barquito se va al vaivén. Si quiere conocer a Martí y a Fidel,